So it's not directly related to the things going to court. But even bringing it up, I think he just kind of wants to get it out there as often as he can.
Mm-hmm.
Just be like, every chance I get, I'm going to say, the FBI bugged me, you know? But again, I don't fault him. Like, that's a good strategy on his part. December 1966, Frenzy asked the Milwaukee City Council to pass a law banning wiretaps in the city limits. Alderman Mark Ryan was in favor, as were some others. The Milwaukee County Labor Council was in favor of it. Frenzy said that the ordinance would keep a police state from existing. A microphone was placed in our office, leading to a cable going direct to the FBI. Some of the most confidential relationships were bugged, even conversations between my wife and my children and myself. The head of the labor union said, "This evil is so widespread that legislation must come. It ought to come from the government closest to the people." William Mulligan, an attorney for the Wisconsin Telephone Company, said his company had no objections so long as exceptions were made so that the company would check on the conditions of wires and connect long-distance calls and things like that. There were certain instances where, like, we have to be able to listen in. That's how phones work. The head of the Milwaukee FBI was invited to attend the hearing but declined, and the matter was tabled for 6 weeks. The local news asked the U.S. attorney for comment, but he declined to say anything because at this time, the Balestrieri tax case was still in process. And he's like, I'm not going to talk about wiretapping while I'm actively involved in this major case that has wiretapping.
So I'm curious, before you go on,
Yeah.
and you probably can't clarify this, but
Sure.
But what is it going to do? So they're tapping people's phone lines,
Yes.
and it is federally illegal for them to do this, but they're doing it anyways.
Yes.
So now, from your perspective, because the way I see it, if the city provides another law, it's not like the police department is going to go arrest the FBI for doing this. Like,
Well, I think that's the idea. Whether they actually would or not, right, that's a whole other question. But I think that's the idea.
Is that they're trying to give the police department the right to go and arrest the FBI for doing this.
Right. So, like, if the FBI is bugging somebody and it's federally illegal to do it, the FBI is not going to arrest the FBI. That's not going to happen. But I think the idea is here that they could then get the police to arrest the FBI or whoever for breaking a state law, or in this case, this is just a city ordinance here they're pushing for. I think that's the idea. Now, you're absolutely right. I don't know that they actually would.
Yeah.
But that, I think, is the idea.
Okay.
Is at least that a different law enforcement agency would be involved. At the end of 1966, after failing to be a candidate for governor twice, Frenzy announced that he was now going to run in the spring election for a Wisconsin Supreme Court seat. He wanted to unseat Justice George Curry. Frenzy said the big issue in this case was age. He was 45 years old and Curry was 66 years old. And Curry would have to retire at age 70 according to a state amendment passed in 1955. I'm pretty sure they have reversed this since then.
Okay.
But at this time, you had to mandatorily retire from the court at age 70. Frenzy said that if Curry retired mid-term, the governor would appoint a successor without an election, and he claimed, most of the Democratic assemblymen around the state are for me. Frenzy said he felt the state's garnishment laws needed revision, and he strongly disagreed with Curry's vote with the 4-3 majority, holding that the Milwaukee Braves' move to Atlanta did not violate antitrust laws, as had been ruled by Judge Elmer Roller at the lower level. I'm not super familiar with that case. I tried to look into it a bit. But for people who don't know, Milwaukee used to have a baseball team called the Braves.
Yep.
The Braves then moved to Atlanta and became the Atlanta Braves. At first, they were held up in court saying they couldn't do it because they were violating antitrust laws. How that violates antitrust laws, I don't know. And it's not important to this.
Mm-hmm.
But then, it reached the Wisconsin State Supreme Court, and they reversed it, saying, no, it doesn't violate antitrust laws. You're free to move. So Frenzy's coming out and blasting this. And it's not that he necessarily disagrees with the decision. He doesn't make any legal points here. It's more that he's using the case that we lost our baseball team because of this guy.
Mm-hmm.
So that's his argument here.
And that's a great way to get people to turn against him, right?
Yeah.
I would feel like.
Yes. There's an ongoing investigation among the Bar Association about the bugging of Frinzy's office. There's eight attorneys who are looking into this. What they're actually doing, I don't know. I know they've pulled the transcripts from the court testimony and the Balestrieri case and things like that, but I don't know what they're going to learn that, isn't already out there. By the end of December 1966, Frinzy gets to try his methods. He has William Covelli in court in Kenosha. Covelli, we haven't talked about him in a long time, but big gambler. He was a big suspect in the Tony Burnett kidnapping and murder. If you can remember, way, way far back, he allegedly was abducted by the FBI and dangled over an open grave to try to get him to confess.
I do not remember this, man. That must have been quite a while
ago,
because I feel like I would remember that.
Yeah. So after the Tony Burnett murder in January 1963, Covelli was just being hounded. They saw him as kind of like the weak link, and he was going to crack. So one night he walks out of a tavern, a car with flashing lights, forces him into the back seat. They drive him to the Tony Burnett murder site, allegedly hold him over the shallow grave spot by his belt, and spin their the guys spin their revolvers at him while asking him to talk and say who did it, eventually letting him go. And I still, to this day, I do not believe that it was FBI agents that did this. I don't know who did. I don't know if this whole thing was a hoax on his part, but it was a very thorough hoax because people saw the car with the flashing lights, and when they went out, the police went out and investigated the next day. They found the footprints at the burial site, showing that people were out there. So I don't know the truth of the matter. And the reason I don't think it was the FBI, just to clarify, for people to be like, well, why wasn't it the FBI? The reason I don't think it was is because I don't see it in the records. And because this happened prior to the records being public records,
you feel like
this is the kind of embarrassing crap that would still be in there.
I like the way you put that. Dude.
Yeah, because all this other stuff that they were doing blatantly illegally, when they became public, people found out.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't just suddenly throw all the records in the trash. So I find it odd that nowhere in here, in those records, does it ever mention it. And when it does mention it, they're basically like, this guy is full of crap.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not saying the FBI is above doing that. Absolutely not saying that. But I don't see any evidence of that being the case.
Yeah. In this instance, it was probably not them.
Yeah. That is what I'm saying. So anyway, so Covelli at this point is on trial for perjury because he had been brought before a John Doe investigation, not for gambling, but looking into the Tony Burnett murder. And he had been caught lying on a couple times during his testimony. Frinzy brings up, my office was bugged, we got to toss these. He ultimately loses that argument because the John Doe investigation was in 1964. The bugs were in and out in 1963. So they're like, this has nothing to do with his perjury. He perjured himself after we stopped bugging him. Mm-hmm. So good on you for bringing it up. You're a good defense attorney, but it's not going to work. At the very end of December 1966, the Milwaukee Sentinel took the unusual step of writing an editorial on the Supreme Court race. They said if the final race is between Curry and Frinzy, they endorse Curry completely. In favor of Curry, they mentioned his experience and integrity. Against Frinzy, they called him out for criticizing the Milwaukee Braves decision. They said that Frinzy appeared to disagree with the outcome because it was unpopular and not for Wisconsin residents, but he made no claims to the legal arguments that he would have disagreed with. The editorial said